Wel, noswaith da pawb. Diolch am heno, am heno. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is our ninth training session now, as part of Sweat Water Quality Monitoring training. Actually, probably more nervous for doing the webinar than it has been for the young people, and it's much easier when I can see you all and gauge how things are going. But if anyone needs to drop out or anything on this, just drop a message, just say you're leaving, and we can bullet point any missed points to you. Say we won't be going through any site selection today. Hopefully that's going to be all covered for you. My colleague Harriet, who I'm sure most of you have already spoken to, will be organising that. So yeah, start things off. My name is Nathaniel. I'm from West Wales Rivers Trust. I've got my colleague Tiff with me. Tiff manages community engagement for Swansea Neath Talbot area and heads up our adopted tributary project over there. And we now cover a huge area of West Wales, actually. So from the River Avon being our furthest east river in Talbot, across into the coastal streams of Pembrokeshire, across into the northern running Nevern catchment, with our most northern river then being the River Rheidol at Aberystwyth. So the trust was formed in 2017, an amalgamation of three previous rivers trusts, so the Teifi Rivers Trust, Pembrokeshire Rivers Trust, and Carmarthenshire Rivers Trust. And they were three very similar organisations competed for shared and limited resources. So the idea to combine them came about, and ever since we've been rapidly expanding and covering a lot more of our catchment areas and delivering some really great work. So some of this work, I suppose you could split into three categories. You have our community engagement side, where we run events, activities, training. Our flagship project within that's Adopted Tributary, which many of you may have come through this evening. Or if not, hopefully you'll go away from this a bit more aware of it and find out some more info about it on our website and our social media platforms. There's a lot of posts and constant activity going on with the team, and really great stuff that hopefully, along with protecting your local rivers, you'll be able to come to events and learn more and be more equipped to protect and safeguard your rivers as part of a community. Second aspect of what we do at the trust then is our habitat work. We do an awful lot of habitat work, many kilometres of riverside fencing to reinstate naturalised river corridors. So this works a lot with landowners and farmers to make these things possible. Within these corridors, we do things such as planting trees and restarting natural vegetation and providing livestock drinking solutions. We also do a lot of work within fish passage as well. So where possible, removing barriers, but where this isn't possible, we do things such as easements and fish pass work. So examples of that on the screen here now. On the second across image of a rocky ramp that we constructed on a tributary of the River Towy. So removal wasn't an option, but in order to get fish up and over this particular barrier, it was decided that the best approach is this rocky ramp, and hopefully now as we speak, as spawning time approaches for these fish, they'll be up and using these. And then third aspect of the work that the trust does is our work on catchment investigations and surveys. So within that, we do many habitat surveys looking at good and bad features of our rivers, as well as more specific catchment focused studies such as sediment and nutrient pathways. So looking at the ways that some of these pollutants which end up in our river are leaving the land, and particular hotspot areas where interventions can be put in place. So that's a flavour of the kind of work that we do at the Rivers Trust. We're just a small part of the Sweat project, as we'll come on to in a few slides. We've been brought in to deliver the training, but the Sweat project is a collaboration between many organisations. Previously, it was carried out solely in the Pembrokeshire area. 2 seconds, guys. I think there's someone waiting in the lobby. Oh, good. So SWEP was previously carried out in Pembrokeshire, and is now, as you'll be aware, has expanded into Carmarthen Bay, and Estuaries Marine SAC, Cardigan Bay Marine SAC, and the Pembrokeshire Marine SAC. So that's covering a huge chunk of West Wales. And unfortunately, quite a lot of the streams that drain into these marine protected areas, other than the larger main rivers, there's many small coastal streams, many of which we're going to be covering and sampling throughout this coastal monitoring blitz. Are currently unmonitored. So a huge amount of these streams draining into these protected areas currently go with very little data on them. There is seasonal bathing monitoring that takes place, but particularly during high rainfall events during the winter, that's when a lot of this nutrients is being pushed out from our rivers and into these coastal areas. So as part of these 2 survey weekends, we'll be filling in the gaps on some of these gaps in the data, and finding particular areas where high concentrations of nutrients are being lost, and we'll be able to hotspot and put further attention and into these particular areas. So to say, we're covering a huge area of West Wales within this monitoring. So we've got the Cardigan Bay SAC, Pembrokeshire Marine SAC, and Carmarthen Bay SAC. So really only small pieces of the coastline that are missed out, and actually quite few rivers other than between Pembrokeshire Marine and Cardigan Bay Marine SACs that the rivers don't tend to drain out into them as much. So to say, this is all made possible tonight, and this whole project, it's collaborating with Marine Conservation Society's Nature Ambyth project, which is across Wales, and doing some really fantastic things. We really encourage you to check out that project, and it's ranging from rivers and the landscape, but also looking more at a particular marine species, and a very vast range of work happening there. And then our ability to carry this out in Carmarthen Bay and the Cardigan Bay areas has been as a result of the Nature Networks Fund, which we've kindly been supported by there. And the Nature Ambyth is kindly supported by the Lottery Heritage Fund as well. Let's say then, through this, it's been the Welsh Partnership of Marine Protected Areas that have brought the SWEP project to these funders' attention, and as a result funded the project and sampling that we'll be doing. So just to reiterate what this what our coastal monitoring blitz is going to involve, it's going to be 2 weekends of sampling. So that's the 9th and 10th of November and the 7th and 8th of December. So ideally on the Saturday and Sunday, but we understand that for people the weekends may actually not be so convenient. So we'll accept results on a Friday and a Monday as well. So why are we looking at coastal streams in particular? We've assigned many sites already. So I think over 150 sites have already been assigned throughout West Wales for these weekends of sampling. But particularly we focused in on coastal streams. As I say, a lot of the streams draining into these protected areas, a majority of them are small coastal streams. So when you look at the regulatory standard of what we call WFD, Water Framework Directive, some of these streams aren't even monitored within that. So we don't have a full gauge and picture of what the impact that some of these small streams are having on the marine areas. So we're going to fill in the gaps, particularly on nutrients, with our surveys for this. And as after all the rivers lead to the sea, so even these small ones are important, particularly looking at the impact on the marine areas. So we're just going to run through some of the impacts and symptoms that we can see of things that affect our rivers. One that's quite easy to see and we'll be looking at quite a bit through these following slides is sediment. So where sediment goes, nutrients tend to flow with it. So it can happen from agricultural runoff, poaching by livestock, ploughed fields. A good way to avoid it is by sowing cover crops. So having cover then for our post-harvest, it's going to keep the soil structure bind together and less likely to run off. And also having these crop fields in fields which are designed for arable crops, so they'll tend to have much larger bunds around them. The conversion of grazing land for crops in such as maize, for example, has huge impacts on loss of soil and also nutrients and other chemicals such as pesticides, along with fertilizers that can be lost off the land as a result of them. And at this time of year, while we're out doing our surveys, it's quite a good time to spot some of these instances, as we're going to have quite high rainfall. And then once the sediment makes it into the river, it's a big problem for our rivers. I think we've come somewhat accustomed to seeing our rivers increasingly coloured up, and riverbeds come in more and more covered with silt. And actually it does cause a big problem for the life living within it. So fish eggs, for example, really aren't keen on sediment. They're kind of like a tight. So if you imagine that, you've got this porous membrane around the egg, and that quickly clogs up with silt. And aside from just fish, it's also invertebrates don't tend to like it as well. Clogs up the layer in between the gravels, which they'll often like to burrow down into. And as a result, you see much less diversity in the insect life living below in your riverbed. And then as we move down to the estuary, some of the symptoms of when we have too much nutrients heading down and in through our rivers is that we'll start to see algal mats starting to form. And perhaps something that we're becoming more and more normalized again to seeing within our estuaries. High levels of nitrogen and phosphate can lead to excessive algal growth. This ends up then smothering the salt marsh. That in turn then diminishes the diversity of different plant species living along it. Can also impede birds then actually from feeding, and eventually then the estuary becomes increasingly anaerobic, which means less oxygen within there, which as a result then diminishes the diversity of life within it, and may not be as favourable to some of the higher demanding species that demand clean and pristine environments. So what we hope as a result of you participating in this project is that we'll have wider awareness of the nutrient pollution issues that West Wales faces, but also that you'll be contributing to better management of these marine protected areas and shedding more light on what's going on and the current situation on some of these coastal streams, as where I say they currently don't get the same level of data gathered about them. And hopefully it will help shape future conservation strategies throughout West Wales. So we're going to get a bit more into the survey now. So as part of the survey, we'll be combining visual monitoring and nutrient testing. So the visual monitoring is recording what we see around the river, the colour of the water, if there's any pollution incidents that we can visually recognise, recording them as such. But also then it also looks more at the actual habitat of the river as well, so recording the shrubs and the plants and the trees that are along the riverbanks, as well as the species that we observe while there. So hopefully we're going to see otters, hopefully we see some birds perhaps moving along the banks. We're going to make note of them. But equally so, while we're surveying, if we don't see these, we're filling in where there are gaps where these species aren't present and perhaps should be present. But we're going to run through some info on visual monitoring as well now. So it's going to be some just prior training so that you're able to recognise these things while you're out along the rivers. So at the Trust, we have quite a big push on visual monitoring, and you'll often see us handing out flyers like this at our events. And we think it's important that for some of you, maybe you'll be able to recognise these things quite easily. But if the general public is quickly able to recognise and understand what these things are, and what they're seeing, more of the true picture of our rivers will be painted as a result of people recognizing, and if it's in serious situations, reporting things. And for the two top images here, where we have a river completely inundated with sewage pollution and a river completely inundated with slurry pollution, those are both instances which we want to report. But on the whole, so all of these things are still going to be things that we'd like to record, and we'll show you a bit more on these. When we say report, what we mean is to report things through to the NRW incident line. Understand that sometimes reporting things to this incident line, you may not get the quick level of response that you may expect, or that your incident may have deserved, but it's really important to keep reporting things, as when we don't report things, we're not painting a true picture of what's happened on the ground. Therefore, if certain instances, ringing in of certain instances don't occur, then on paper, these things are getting better, and we do need to keep reporting things in when they're a serious incident. So just going to talk you through identifying different forms of pollution, as this will all be part of the visual side of the survey. So we've got, first of all, as we're moving around clockwise on my screen, this first image here, when we look at the river, we're always looking at the colour and the smell, and those are usually good indicators of what pollution incidents there may be. So for slurry, like on this top left image here, it's got this characteristic browny green colour, and in serious instances then will also be accompanied by a smell, and perhaps then an excessive buildup of foam as well. And as a follow-up to this training, we'll also be sending out to you a really great guide that's recently produced on identifying different forms of pollution, that's been put together by the Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum, and a really great resource. Continuing on clockwise, then we've got an example here of a sewage discharge. So quite often when we run workshops, we'll ask people, what do you think sewage is going to look like? And quite often it'll be met with, oh, it's going to be brown, because we think sewage, we think poo. But sewage is a lot more than just poo. It's our wastewater, so it's containing things from our utilities, from our dishwashers, anything, our shower water, also macerated toilet paper as well. So all of these things tend to combine up to produce this characteristic grey colour. And again, this will be accompanied by quite a characteristic recognisable smell. And then the image at the bottom, then, that's when instances from agricultural pollution and sewage pollution remain unchecked and poorly regulated, that's when you end up with a situation like at the bottom image, where the River Wye sadly turned green 3 summers ago. And again, just continuing on, some more examples then of sewage pollution. So in this top right image, we've got a big issue here. Aside from the fact that there's a low water discharge, you can see a clear river with this characteristic grey sewage water discharge. If you look at the outfall pipe itself, you can see that there's sanitary products and toiletry debris building up around there. So within the sewage network, there should be screening that takes place to take out some of these nasties. Obviously, they're getting released straight into the environment, which will move them down the rivers and out into our seas. But also, they cause big problems within the network themselves. So if you imagine the magician when he pulls the hanky out of his sleeve, and it's almost an endless string of hanky that comes out. Some technicians at wastewater plants have described that they get issues like this happening very often as a result of wet wipes and other products that shouldn't end up down the toilet, but do end up getting flushed down. So we can report when we see instances like this of build-up of sanitary products around outfalls directly through to Welsh Water, and having known that there's within that area of that network area, then they can task their engineers to go out and find solutions and install screening processes if necessary. So again, if we're not able then to to see the sewage at the time. This bottom right hand image then shows us the silty, grey, dusty detritus that gets left on the bottom of the riverbed following a sewage discharge. So the whole riverbed will look very sooty and ashy, and often it will be on the same bank directly downstream of an outfall that's been discharging. So all things that we want to record during our surveys. And this top right image then, that's an example of what we call a misconnection. So that's when things are correctly plumbed in into the storm drain system. So storm drains designed to take fairly clean water from our urban and drainage network. And instead, we can sometimes have things that have been plumbed into there, such as toilets, washing machines, dishwashers, etc. Even just commonly sinks as well. Often a sink will lead down into a guttering downpipe, and every time we do our dishes, then potentially we're discharging some of those of the chemicals and detergents straight into the open environment. So just a little bit of a flavour about pollution. When we talk about pollution, we have two categories generally we group them as. So we have diffuse pollution, which comes from widespread activities throughout the catchment. And what we really find with diffuse pollution is that's a large cumulative impact. One instance of diffuse pollution isn't the end of the world, but many unchecked sources of diffuse pollution cumulatively can have a large impact. And diffuse pollution can also be a real killer on some of the smaller streams, some of our tributaries in particular. And then we have point source pollution. So point source pollution is when it comes from one single direct source. So an example of that would be a wastewater discharge, or perhaps a spill that's directly happened. And we'll come through some examples now shortly of what these different forms of pollution can look like. So during low rainfalls, say diffuse pollution can have almost a larger impact. Things that happen in through when there's low rivers is you're not going to be met with the same dilution, and it's going to spend much longer within the rivers when it does get in there. Fortunately, though, for much of the diffuse pollution, it's much harder for it to happen during low rainfall, but can happen. So we've got examples here of things that can impact and cause diffuse pollution. So runoff from across yards and land. So it can happen during washdown, or perhaps spillage that happen. Unfortunately, as I say, we do a lot of work with farmers at the Trust, and there are really great ways that you can minimise these things from happening, and we're really keen in order to prevent them. So, for example, on this top image here, where you can see that gateway, we can install a grate and a sleeping policeman. So that'll act as a bund which will retain the water. This manhole that you can see will go directly under the road and discharge into a small tributary of the River Towy. So minimising these things from happening in the first place is the best solution. And we'd hope to be able to support more farmers in good, what we call clean, dirty water separation, and on-farm infrastructure. And these can have big reductions on any accidental spills that may occur. And also helping to manage when we get higher rainfall coming in, and that higher rainfall creates a lot more problems in yards. And then anything that we spray and spread on our yards within fertilizers or manures, including pesticides as well. Despite there being no rainfall, they do have an ability to drift out, and when applied excessively, there is leaching that happens out into groundwater. And then when we bring rain in, these can all be mobilised quite quickly, especially if recently applied. And then livestock again, so free access for livestock, particularly herd animals like cattle, that congregate around water sources. This can lead to over-trampling of riverbanks, which leads to sediment pollution. But also then manure heaps may form. And then when rainfall comes through, this will all be quite quickly mobilised. So when we bring in high rainfall to the situation, things can all the things that we spray and spread onto our land can quickly be mobilized, especially if recently applied. Examples here show sediment pollution. Sediment pollution is one of the easiest things for us to recognize and visually see. But the same pathways and runoff can occur for any fertilizers, manures, and pesticides which are applied or end up on the land. And again, what happens then throughout our road drainage network? So these silt and manures that are traveling down the road, but also then any oils or spills that happen on the road can quickly be fast tracked from our drainage network straight into our rivers. And there's no treatment that goes on these storm drains, so they're quite quickly passed straight into our open environment. And again, then, so our drainage networks around our land quickly transport and bring this into our rivers. So it's not just our road drain network, but also our field drain network can be quite quick pathways for some of these pollutants to quickly move in. So it's quite important when we have rainfall come in that we're very careful about how we treat our land and what we apply onto them. As I say, these can quite quickly leave and enter our rivers. And then point source examples. So we touched on misconnections. This top row shows us both the outward end of misconnections, and in the middle then an example of a misconnection. So that's our gutter in there, and two new perhaps a washing machine and dishwasher have been installed, and it's been plumbed into where the guttering goes. So every time these utilities are used, they're going to be discharging straight out into the open environment. And at the outward end, as we can see in these left and right top images, we'll often see this characteristic grey water colour coming out, especially if there's a lot of misconnections happening there. We may smell the type of pollutant. So we may smell detergent, or we may smell toilet nasties, or we may see then visual clues such as sanitary waste and products that are ending up around the outfall or even hanging off the gateway. And all of these have abilities to take pollutants from far away from the rivers quite quickly into them as well. So that's just a quick run through of ways that we can recognize different pollution. We're now going to get into more of our survey and ourselves. So talking you through the survey, what we're going to be recording through the survey, and also how we carry out using the test kits. I'm just going to pause for a second and see if there's any questions or any issues over on Teams. No questions in the chat, so we'll continue on. So the testing side, the methodology comes from Freshwater Watch. Freshwater Watch is a daughter organization of Earthwatch, and they've supplied us with the kits for this testing blitz. So it's been carried out all over the world in recent years, with a majority of the test sites being carried out in the UK itself. So we're still managing to stay on top there. And after these 2 weekends, there'll be a lot more surveys that have been carried out in the UK again. So by following this methodology, we're keeping things consistent. We're following the same methodology that's been used worldwide. We're using the same equipment, and there's certain things within our kits, such as our sampling cups and our same branded sachets that we're using that keep things consistent there. So always using the same powder, always the same amount of powder, and always using the same amount for our water sample. We then provide training to keep things consistent, to avoid subjective observations. So that's why we've run through some of the visual cues on identifying forms of pollution, so that you're able then to identify things when you carry out your survey. We have site consistency by having the same person at the same site consistently throughout monitoring. And then we have descriptive consistency then by the same person answering the same things in the same language each time. So it's important though throughout the survey that we keep health and safety in mind. So before we head out to do any of our surveys, we want to be fully aware of the weather. So that means we're aware of the wind, we're aware of recent rainfall, aware of river levels, and there's some links on the slide at the end that are helpful in finding some of these things out. And then for those of you which should be on more coastal streams or perhaps monitoring the tidal zone, we are trying to avoid tidal zone as much as possible. But for some coastal streams, the only accessible areas may be where it discharges out into the ocean. So we need to just be aware of the tide there and avoiding any saline influences. So ideally doing it at low tide where possible, but particularly avoiding any salt marsh or mud flats. So any highly saline environment, we definitely want to be up above the tidal zone and so fully aware of what's going on weather-wise around us, being aware of the banks when we step down and onto them, avoiding where possible, stepping or moving down off any banks, and we'll show you some examples of what makes a safe site and how to sample safely shortly. Throughout the survey, we're going to have gloves. So once we start handling the water, pop our gloves on. That's going to protect us from any waterborne contaminants. And then before and after our survey, we're going to wash our hands. It's just to avoid any interference and also, again, any nasties that could end up left on our hands after surveying. We want to strictly avoid any areas of blue-green algae. So blue-green algae looks like a paint-like scum floating on the surface. If you're not aware of it, there's great examples if you leave this and Google blue-green algae. Hopefully we're not going to see any during the weekends of surveying during the winter months, and we're all going to be surveying from flowing water bodies, which would hopefully make it even less likely. But if we do identify areas of blue-green algae, just continue further upstream until you notice a difference and a lack of blue-green algae present, and then you can continue to take your sample there. And any pollution sources identify, and if highly concentrated, do not touch them and stay away from them. And just say continue upstream until dilution is met, or perhaps sample from the opposite bank further downstream where some of the contaminants will be mixing with, but it won't be as highly concentrated to cause any impacts to health. And then the other things to be aware of is the chemicals in these test tubes. So these little test tubes look fairly similar to sherbet tubes. So just make any children that you're taking out with you, if you are just aware of what these tubes are, that insides some nasty stuff which may upset their stomach. And it's not a little sherbet tube, there's something left at the bottom. And just make sure that that pin's always remaining in there as well. And then finally, dangerous plants. We want to be careful of any dangerous plants. So dangerous plants are going to look like small white flower bulbous heads. So they commonly, the plant in particular we want to avoid is hogweed. But we also want to be careful of things such as hemlock water dropwort. So anything with a small white flower and bulbous head, completely stay away from them. But hopefully, because of the time of year, we're going to be fairly free of them. But if you do see any, just don't touch them, and avoid disturbing them. So site selection, we'll get into things now. So firstly, we want to make sure that the site doesn't dry up. So we want to choose a site with year-round water, or at least water for 9 months of the year. That's going to classify it as a watercourse. We then want to have permission. So ideally, it's a publicly accessible site. But if we do need to enter any private land, you're going to need to have a conversation prior with the landowner and just have permission from them. And definitely don't take any dogs onto private land. As you never know if livestock are going to be present, and it may cause issues that will endanger you while sampling. And then we want to avoid any hogweed as well. So we've just been through identifying them. So any white flowering plants, try and avoid. and then try and have safe access down to the river. We'll show you some examples now. And if there isn't safe access down, definitely avoid any eroding banks. But if you have steep banks with railings, there are methods that can be used, such as a sampling vessel on a long reach pole. And I'll show you some examples of that now in the next slide. And then just ask yourself, is there a safer area to sample from? So is there a safer, shallower area I could access from? And ideally, that's the kind of areas that we're going to be looking for. So different ways that we can collect our sample. We can have a sampling vessel on a long rope. Try to avoid anything like very thin nylon line, such as fishing line, as this under tension can almost have a cheese wire effect and cut your skin. So pick a fairly thick rope or cord when you're doing any of this. You may want to consider a rope on a long stick, or as we'll see in the sampling video in a short second, a cane pole with a well cleaned out vessel on the end of it, which we can dip and collect our sample with. And all of these are going to be vary depending on your site. So good to have a site that you're aware of, or if you're assigned a site, just have some time prior to sampling just to be familiar with the site yourself and pick an appropriate sampling vessel. Goes without saying, these vessels that we sample in need to be very clean. So give them a good wash and an overnight soak, well dry out, and a visual inspection. And then when you do collect your sample, just remember the rule of 3. So that's to have your sampling cup washed out 2 times, and on the 3rd time, then that'll be your sample. And then the same thing then for your small test sample cup. Rinse this little cup out 2 times, and on the 3rd time, fill it up to the fill line. There's a faint line that you'll be able to see on there, and fill it up to that line then, and that'll be where you're inserting your test tube then into, in order to suck up the right amount of water, so you're not sucking up too much. Or you may have a fairly easy site, say that may be discharging down a cliff, as some coastal streams do, in which case it may be easy to just fill up directly into your sampling cup. So safe site selection. So we definitely don't want to be going down or trying to enter the water from any steep banks. Where railing is present, you may be able to use a sampling vessel safely. But always do check if there's a safer site upstream or downstream of it. So particularly any stable gravel shoals, and we'll show you some examples of them shortly. Some places may be fairly easy to get down to, but much harder to get back up and out of. So definitely no clambering down any steep banks. So say there definitely sites we want to avoid is, so turbid water is going to make things much harder. So we don't want to be stepping into the water where we can't see 2 inches into it. We're unaware of the depth that we're stepping into, and things may have changed since you last visited the site. We want to stay well away from any steep banks. They may be undercut. So they may be liable to crumbling or erosion. So even if we do have a sampling vessel on a long pole, or we're able to throw it off a string, we don't want to be standing near any areas of undercut banks, eroding areas. So hopefully then we continue to the next meander, and hopefully there'll be a safe place on a gravel shoal inside of that meander bend. Livestock, we're going to be very careful around any areas of livestock. So definitely don't take your dogs into any areas of livestock. And if you do have to head into any private land, you're going to have a conversation with the landowner first. Ask them about the livestock. Definitely avoid any young bullocks, and well, for all cattle for that matter. But sheep grazing, as long as the landowner is happy that you're not going to disturb them and grants you permission, you'll be okay. Again, just no dogs in those areas of livestock. And even if there is a fence there, be very careful about going behind them, avoid it. because some of the areas, such as on a meander, the fence line may come quite close to the river, and that puts you again at risk then of being near a steep eroding bank. So sites like this we want to be avoiding. Examples of much safer sites though. Inside of a meander bend, we're typically going to find these gravel shoals, so hopefully they're nice, safe sloping access into the river. We want to have good public access to these sites, so ideally in the view of somewhere in public, or if not, we're always going to be letting someone know where and when we're sampling, and ideally sampling in pairs, which hopefully many of you will be doing. And as a bonus then, if the riverbed is visible and we can really easily gauge the depth, then that's a fantastic site. Slightly more risky site, you can have rivers running through bedrock, so bedrock can be quite slippy, so avoid any steep areas and identify nice, safe, flat areas. So the arrows here are pointing to much flatter areas of the bank. So when you approach a site, just have a quick look at it, look at both banks, look what's in front of you, and just assess what you're stepping down to first, but take real care along any areas of bedrocks. They may be slippery, so definitely avoid any sloping areas and try and pick out a nice flat spot within easy reach. That's not to say that we can only sample on small rivers. Example here from the River Towy, just downstream of Llandilo. I keep reiterating this point of inside of a meander bend. Hopefully we're going to find stable gravel shoals. These stable gravel shoals are going to give us gradual access into deeper water. We're going to have slower water running close to us with faster water further away. So hopefully then with our sampling vessel as an aid, it's going to be a much safer site to sample from. Just before we go into a video, just to break down the sample process, we want to sample about 10 to 30 centimeters deep. We're going to take the sample away from us and face it upstream. So that's to avoid our feet disturbing any sediments, which can contaminate or interfere with our sample. So always sample upstream of us where possible, or avoid getting in the water altogether. Clean your water container out twice before you fill it the third time. And if you can pick a safe site and follow this, you're on your way, you've collected your sample. And the final thing then for you to do is to pop it in your tube, compare it with our swatch chart. So we'd run it over it to find the colors that it sits between, and you'll have your sample. Make note of all your observations on your survey using the survey form, and then either save it to your outbox or upload it directly if you've got signal, or if you're writing down your survey, then write your survey observations down and your test results, and then upload them then when you get back home. We'll get through to that shortly now. Just final to reiterate what's in the kits. So your kits are going to arrive to you in a little sandwich bag. It'll contain 2 swatch charts, which look like this. So one for N and one for P. You'll then have sachets or loose tubes. The bottom, if you look on the bottom tab, so that's the opposite end to where the little plastic pin is. Written on the bottom will either be PO4 or NO3. So PO4 will be phosphate, NO3 will be our nitrate. What you may find easy if you receive loose sachets is to just note on the bottom part here, the part that will never enter into any water sample. You could just put a P or an N or a coloured dot to indicate what one it is, just to make it easy if when you're out on site. Or if you hold these up to the light, it'll illuminate behind it, and you can see the text then on it itself. So you have your test tubes in there. You have this all-important sampling cup. If the sample cup isn't in your kit, straight away let us know. This is our way of getting consistent results and getting the right amount of water to go in these tubes at the end of it. So definitely want to make sure you've got them. And then also our gloves then. We'll have our gloves within here. And they'll be popped on as soon as we head out onto site and before we touch any water. The only piece of equipment that we won't have, and will be mentioned in the video we're going to watch shortly, is a Secchi tube. We're not going to be looking at turbidity. Turbidity is the clarity of water, so the color of water, how easily it is to see through it. We're not going to be recording that, as because it's only a two weekend long blitz. There'll be a lot of plastic waste involved, and the focus is on nutrient pathways into the marine areas. So the monitoring the turbidity wasn't as necessary, but as part of a whole river health monitoring, it does have its merits. So throughout the survey, we're going to be just gathering some general information, such as your name, your site, an image of your site. So we take our photo of a site, trying to get both banks in and facing upstream. So that's going to try and get 50 meters of the river in where possible, but definitely we want both banks in the image. Aside from location, then it's going to look at the ecology of the site, so visual indicators of water health. So that's why we've run through some of those slides so that you're able to recognize things now, such as pollution incidents, such as sewage discharges or slurry pollution that may be then impacting on the nutrients that you're testing for. You're going to estimate the water level and flow. So playing again with poo sticks, we're going to throw a stick in and gauge the flow. We'll talk through shortly the way that we characterize that. And then finally, we've got a chemical aspect. So that's filling up the little test tubes and then recording the concentrations of nutrients. So I touched on it. We're going to watch this video now. May repeat some of what I've said, may be somewhat redundant. Hopefully we can hear it. I'm just going to pause that and check back on the chat that we can hear things. Tiff, could you hear that? No. There we go. We'll skip through the sampling video. Doesn't seem to be working. But when we sign up on Freshwater Watch, once we head onto our signed group page, we can head on to the learning aspect. So I'll show you the portal page shortly. If we head on to the learning zone, there'll be a link to this video on there. Well worth you just recapping on the training, watching this video, or perhaps refreshing on it the night or two before you head out sampling. If you have any issues accessing any of the portal at a later date, just do email through to Harriet, my colleague, which you should all have the contact of, or if you've come through from our posters and advertising for the events, the email for her is on there. So that's Harriet Thompson at westwalesriverstrust.org. And just email through to Harriet and we'll troubleshoot any login issues, but should be okay once you're all signed in and through to that. So as part of the survey, we're going to be recording our name, the date, the time, and when using the app, it'll log most of this by the name and site name for you. Log the number of participants so we can see, hopefully, there's going to be some of you may be getting children, nieces, nephews involved in this, grandchildren. So just note down the amount of participants that are going along with you to do this survey, and then also taking that photo. So in landscape mode on our phone, upstream facing with ideally 50 meters, but definitely both banks in. Then we're going to log our water body type. So all of our sites are going to be rivers or streams or flowing water ditches. So note that as such. Then it's going to ask you to record the land use around the river. So here's the river that you're sampling from. Is it flowing from an urban residential area, a rural residential area, an industrial or commercial area, an urban green space, so perhaps a park, or field green, mixed agricultural area. So that could be where we've got both livestock and arable across the landscape that we can see, or we've perhaps got strictly just arable, or we've got just livestock. And then we've got forestry area. So note if you're within a forestry, so that's a planted area. And then also then record if you're within grassland, or other then for all the other habitats that you may be within. Bankside vegetation, so record what you've seen along the bank. So is there trees and shrubs, or perhaps just grass and small plants? Perhaps you've got badly poached areas or recently disturbed ground, so that would be bare soil. Or you've got artificial banks, so that's going to be recorded then as concrete or impermeable surfaces. And then there's an options box again then for all the other types of bank sides that you may identify outside of those characteristics. Then we're going to look at the water surface. So what do we see in the water itself? Hopefully things are looking clear and clean. Perhaps you note an excessive buildup of foam. So across both banks or down the flow of the river, there's excessive high amount of foam. Record that as such. Perhaps you notice an algae floating up. Record that. Important to note with algae won't have leaves and stems. Some of you may be sampling on streams which have ranunculus beds. These are going to be flowing, much more moving in the water, perhaps in faster flowing water areas, and they're going to have stems and leaves. So don't confuse the algae with floating plants. Algae is going to be much more stringy, gunky-like, really unpleasant looking. These plants are going to be much more appealing to the eye. And then again on the water surface, you may see an oily sheen, so record as such. Maybe worth then also recording on making note when you see the oily sheen begin to stop, because you may be honing in on the source of pollution. And then also then identify if you see slurry within the water. So slurry is going to have this browny green characteristic color, and maybe accompanied by a smell as well. So record then all that you can see across the water surface. And then specifically, we're going to want to look at algae. So hopefully no algae. Streams that may have had quite a lot of algae for much of the summer during the time of sampling may not have algae. But if we do see algae during these winter months, we want to be recording it. So we may see evenly dispersed algae. So that could be throughout the riverbed or the actual water itself stained by the color of green algae. So that would come under evenly dispersed. You've got floating mats, so as goes without saying, that's going to be floating up on the surface. You may see algae attached to rocks or onto debris within the river. So not to be confused with plants, but it's going to be much more of a stringy, gunky-like substance. And that could be attached to rocks, boulders, logs, or perhaps strung around an outfall or any other debris within the water. And then we also want to make note if we do see any blue-green scum as well. So that's going to be blue-green algae. And then we're also going to note any litter that we see. So noting if it's in the river, along the river banks, or perhaps we see no litter, hopefully. And then if you do see sources of plastic pollution litter, just record what you think the sources of them are. So landfill site, bin, fly tipping, recreational. It's been brought up during some of the surveys that people are seeing much more agricultural plastics, so things such as silage wrap. Unless the form's updated to include an agricultural option, just record that under fly tipping for now. It's not strictly to say that it may have been fly tipped. It may have blown off the fields during poor weather and been outside of control. But still record any plastic pollution that we're seeing. And then any pollution sources in the surroundings. So if we can see any of the examples of stuff that we showed in those previous slides, so urban runoff, agricultural runoff, an outfall pipe discharging, it's as important as to record an outfall pipe discharging as it is to record it not discharging. If we know it's not discharging, but then when these results get looked into, we find that there's an outfall just up above you, we can either rule it in or rule it out. So we can build a better picture of what was happening on the day. And then aside from the ecology aspect, you're going to be noting any of the following water uses. So there could be people fishing along the banks, swimming in the river, Boating, irrigation is going to be when someone's extracting water for their own private use of water. So to water any crops, or perhaps as a water supply to any ponds, etc. Public water supply going to be quite noticeable areas met with signage around them often, and would be quite hard to access. And then public use of bank for recreation and animal access as well. So we're building up a picture of people along the river and how the rivers are being used. And then aquatic life. So a good time to do that is while we've got our survey tubes and sample tubes in our hand. While we've got them in our hand waiting for the time to go off, we can just make note of what we see around us. And the different plant species that we see within the water, and then the life that we see around and in the water itself. So things such as fish, amphibians, aquatic birds, aquatic mammals, invertebrates and insects, or perhaps any reptiles that we see. And then a space for all the other animal life that we could see around the river, we can make note of. And then finally, we just want to note if there's been any rainfall during the last 24 hours. So either none, light showers, or heavy and prolonged. And then say we're going to gauge the flow. So that's going to be three categories. We look at the flow within. So this is where we're going to play a game of poo sticks, or perhaps try and note the leaves coming down. Perhaps we're going to see quite a lot of autumn leaves coming down the river. So we categorize that as either surging. So surging's faster than walking speed. So if we're walking alongside the stick that we've thrown in, it's perhaps faster than we can keep up at a standard pace. Or perhaps it's steady, it's just keeping up with us as we walk down river. Or if we're having to stop to let our stick catch up with us, then we're going to call it slow. Or perhaps the stick hits the water and doesn't move, in which case it's going to be still. And then you can estimate the average water level. So this is where it comes into knowing your site or being familiar with it. You can also use clues such as debris lines or scum lines along any banks to gauge that. So is it high, average flow? Does it look particularly low, or has it dried up? Hopefully our sites won't have dried up. We're going to be avoiding that. And then estimate the width of your waterway. So just the channel width across then from one bank to the other. And then once we've done that, it's just time then to fill up our tubes and get going with things. So important points to remember is that nitrate, so that's N, and that's our much pinker swatch chart. Phosphate is purple. Nitrate is going to take 3 minutes. So from the second we slurp up our water from our sample cup, and I'll go through a little example shortly because we can't see the video. Once we suck it up into our tube, we're going to ask our partner to hit the stopwatch, and we're going to hold our tube in our hand then for 3 minutes. The reason we're going to hold it in our hand for 3 minutes is that in cold weather conditions, the reaction time may slow down. So as a result, we're going to treat every single sample as if we were taking them below 10 degrees. Some of you may be taking it out on a warm afternoon. Some of you may be out on a cold, frosty morning. So we're going to treat it all the same. So once we fill it up, we're just going to hold the tube in our hand, keep it at body temperature, and then wait for our 3 minutes to go up. At which point then we're going to run it along our swatch chart. So here's an example of a filled up tube here. Much harder to see online now, but you're going to run it across and look at for where the color behind begins to darken your solution. Once you reach that, you're going to move back, and you'll be confident then that you can say this is the color range. We're not looking to target that it matches with one color or the other, but we're looking to say that it sits between. So for nitrate, perhaps it sits between 0.5 and 1. We're going to then record that as our range as such. The phosphate tubes, so our phosphate swatch chart leads up to purple, and that is going to take 5 minutes. So for those of you which may be savvy on time, perhaps you're going to want to do your phosphate sample first. And then your buddy's then going to do the nitrate sample. By the time you've then read your phosphate, your nitrate will be ready, and away you go. But it doesn't matter which order, and hopefully the survey isn't going to take you too long anyway. So before we go through the platform, and what we're going to access online and talk you through downloading the survey form and where to access the guidance for that, I'm just going to show you taking a water sample. So got my tube out here. I'm going to pop my gloves on. For the sake of demo, I'm just going to pop one on. So easy, get your glove on, try and avoid touching the fingertips, put it on using the bottom, expel any air out. You then, having collected your sample, rinse through your sample container twice, and then rinse through this sample cup once. You're going to have it filled up to the fine line perfectly. You're then going to pull out this little pin. I'll just turn off screen sharing so you can see this a bit clearer. So hopefully now the main screen is just me. Yeah, no. Can we see me on my cam? I had a raised hand, so. Yeah, so okay, we can see. Can you all hear me? I'm a bit worried now. I had a message on there saying no sound. You can all hear me. Great, cool. So we have our sample cup. We're just going to we pull out that little green pin. We can then pop that into our plastic sandwich bag so it's all away. We're then just making sure that the reagent powder is all at the bottom. So give it a little, avoiding pinching the top, just give it a little tap, make sure it's all at the bottom there. You're then going to try and expel half of the air out of this sachet. So where we find useful to do that is to pinch the sachet with your thumb and index finger, and then using your other finger, you'll just bend the sachet slightly. So as you can see there, it's just slightly bent. We then, using our sampling cup, turn the tube upside down, push it into the bottom and begin to expel the air, which will suck up all of the liquid in that cup. If you look, no water coming out. I'm doing this over my laptop, I'm that confident. And then you give it a little shimmy, shake up, make sure that there's no powder caught in the top. The hole in these are so fine that once the water's in it, it's not going to come out and your fingers aren't going to interfere. So give it a little shimmy, make sure that the solution's dissolved. And then this is our phosphate. So we're going to wait then 5 minutes for that reaction to take place before we then run it along our swatch chart. And we're going to be looking for when the background color begins to darken the image. So for this one, while it's clear, you'll see that if get to here, you definitely not got that concentration. So we'll wait 5 minutes and see where this gets to. What we have got a nitrate sample here. So albeit this has come from a relatively clean stream. So what we're going to be looking at is to pass it over the swatch chart. As you can see, once it reaches here at 0.5, see how the background color has darkened it? So we're definitely not at that range. In which case, we're going to be saying we're within 0.2 and 0.5. As you can see, doesn't darken, darkens. So that's the range then that we're going to record as such. Following that, we just record that through. We can then remove our gloves and wash our hands and upload our survey. It's going to pop screen sharing back on. So in the guidance we've sent through to you, we've asked you to log on to Freshwater Watch, sign in on their website, which you can find at the top right-hand corner of their page. Then you're going to click on Create an Earthwatch community account. And sign up with a username and password of your choice. It can be something impersonal and funny, or it can be your name, whatever you would like. But bear in mind that that your login may come up on this map. So if you don't want to disclose who you are, you may want to choose a private name. What we have found is that some people have found when you get your authorization link sent to you to activate by clicking on it in your email, it says activation link expired. Even if it was only sent a minute ago, you're thinking this is strange. But if you actually then just continue and log back in, having clicked that link, the username then and your password should work. So just troubleshoot it with that first if you do get told that the activation link expired. So then once you've logged in, click on your group. So you'll be either assigned Carmarthen Bay and Gower area, Cardigan Bay, Ceredigion area, or perhaps you've been assigned Pembrokeshire coastal area. Click on into there. Then you'll have 4 aspects on there. So you'll have your learning area, your prepare area, your upload area, and your results area. So your learning area is where you can find out further instructions, recap on any of the guidance. You can watch the training video, which sadly we weren't able to watch. So definitely try and, as a takeaway from here, visit the training video, recap, and watch that perhaps just before carrying out your sample, so things are nice and refreshed for you. And then there'll be some further guidance and info then on and a test that you can carry out just to check your knowledge. What everyone is definitely going to have to do is the prepare and upload section. So in order to get the survey, the priority is going to be to do it on a mobile app on your phone. We're going to want you to take a smartphone out with you anyway, or a phone, as means of calling for help and letting people know who you are. So if you've got a smartphone, download Survey123 app. You can then log into Survey123 app using the login details which are created on the Freshwater Watch website. You'll then be given a box for your appropriate group. Look for your group name and tap download the survey, which will be 2 outward pointing arrows. Tap on that on the right corner, and your survey form should download then. Any issues with that, just drop us an email. But say, download that app, log in with the details that you've done on Freshwater Watch, and then find your group name once you're on the app and on the Survey123 app and logged in, and then you'll be taking care of downloading your survey form from there. Some of you may prefer or may not have a smartphone and may prefer to use a paper form. If you're going to use a paper form, then you can print it out on the Freshwater Watch portal site, or if you have any issues with that, drop us an email and we can send you the form. You'll then want to print that out and take that out to site with you. If you are doing the paper form, bear in mind that you will have to upload your results then yourself when you get back to your personal computer at home. So for that, you've got the upload section. So the upload section is going to give you guidance on how to upload your data. So if you've got signal when you're out at site, you can, at the end of your survey form, hit upload and send. Or if you haven't got signal, or you want to save your mobile data, just click at the bottom of the form, save to Outbox. And if you click save to Outbox, once you get Wi-Fi then back at home, or you've got internet connection again, you can upload it, and it won't in any way, because you've saved it to Outbox, it shouldn't interfere with your location at all. And then finally, if you've done the paper form, you're going to want to hit visit into the upload section and manually then enter in the data. Drop a pin on the map, which is on there for where your location is. Or if you're able to cross-reference for your lat and long, a great website, which I'll show you a link for at the end, is Grid Reference Finder. Grid Reference Finder will give you then the lat and long for your specific site, and you can enter in that there if needed. And then finally, you've got the results section. So the results section is going to allow you to look into all the different data points. And hopefully there's going to be a lot more of those data points around West Wales now, after these 2 weekends of sampling. So you'll be able to have a look at that there. But there'll also be a report that's put together from the project partners within this, and that'll be sent out to you at a later date. The important bit to remember is that none of this will be possible without you guys. The sampling is completely reliant on your volunteer efforts. So huge thank you for joining us tonight, and bearing through an hour and a half of me rambling at my computer screen. I'm going to come out of the presentation shortly and we'll have some questions, but I'm just going to leave you with these useful links. So you may be curious about the current situation of some of our rivers. A really, really good online reference for that is Waterwatch Wales. So Waterwatch Wales is a Natural Resources Wales resource. It's an interactive online map where you can look through all the cycles of regulatory monitoring that have been carried out since, I believe, 2001. We're currently on cycle 3 now, so when you head on to there, if you want to see the most recent updates, take a look at cycle 3. That'll then open you up a map. You'll have different keys for layers that you can look at. The ones that are going to be of interest to water quality are going to be Water Framework Directive data. So that'll be Water Framework Directive by water body, or Water Framework Directive by catchment body. Catchment body being the general area and drainage into there, water body being the specific monitoring on that particular stream. If you want to find out about sewage discharges, so the figures and actually where some of these discharge and outfall points are. So you can head on to the riverstrust.org sewage map, or just simply Google Rivers Trust sewage map, and the first link that will come up there will take you through to it. That's an interactive map. You can see all the different outfall points, and it's useful then for when you're coming into selecting your site, just to know where these are, so you can make appropriate decisions. Then the tide and conditions, so checking any local tide books if you're aware of them, and searching for your local tides. A good resource for that, Surfline. It's going to cover general tides for most coastal areas, and also ocean conditions, so you're going to be aware then if there's any large swells forecast, and also the wind. Obviously checking weather as well via Met Office. Footpaths, so if you want to find out where you can safely access, obviously got OS maps, but if those of you may not have a local OS map, want a free resource, you can head to footpathmap.co.uk, and that's a really good site to find out all different footpaths, and start scouting out where you can publicly access near your sampling river. Then Grid Reference Finder, mentioned that already, really good for finding different locations. If you want to perhaps give someone the What Three Words location for where you're going, you can find all of that on there. And then finally, then you've got NRW river levels, where you can find out the river levels on your rivers. Not every river is going to have a gauging station on it. Most flood risk areas now do. But you can work at the general trend if your rivers are likely to be rising or hopefully falling during your sampling. You can make yourself aware of the river conditions by checking there. a way that it may be useful is if you headed out on a Saturday and the river levels are a bit high for you to safely do your sampling, you can check then on the Sunday morning if nearby rivers have started to drop. That should be an indication then the rivers are getting lower, and hopefully your day sampling will be much safer. If we do have any freak or storms, which are going to definitely create hard conditions across all sites, then the sampling may be postponed. But fingers crossed, we're going to have a good sampling weekend. Just a final point to mention is that some of you may have to travel to your sampling sites. So to limit any barriers to participation here, we're able to reimburse that. So if you contact Alison Hargrave, her email's on the screen, but we're also able to provide that for you. If you email Alison, she'll be able to sort out reimbursing your travel costs. So if you just make note of your mileage or just check back then on your phone via a map such as Google Maps or your phone maps, how far it was to your sample location, and then double that for your return journey, should be able to reimburse that for you. So again, none of this would be possible without you guys joining and all the volunteers that we've had so far in the training sessions. I thoroughly enjoyed doing them, but I'm even more looking forward to seeing the results that we get. And hot spotting more of the pollution and nutrient pathways into our coast. So big thanks for joining us, and I'll just cut to any questions that may have arisen, and then close the call.